Hi there everyone, my name's Gwen and I'm going to be talking to you today about how surveys are awesome and how to do them well. I've been doing surveys in the SCA for a few years now, ranging from expressions of interest in a potential t-shirt design, to trying to come up with group heraldry for a guild, to figuring out the direction that a specialised newsletter could take when I took over as editor, to a project that I'm doing at the moment, a very large survey on what makes events welcoming and accessible and inclusive for people in our community. Surveys are a fantastic tool for building a greater understanding of different opinions and preferences and experiences among a group of people. And they can help you with your planning and your decision making in a very real and important way. But before we talk about how to do a survey, let's talk about why you might do a survey and why you might not. A survey is a way to find out the perspectives of a group of people, a local group, the people who read a newsletter, event attendees, people interested in a particular topic, basically any group you can define well enough to distribute the survey to them specifically. You might be trying to work out what kind of people are in your group. You might want to know their preference between different options. You might want their feedback on something you're doing. You might want to investigate their experiences around an issue that you're trying to change. Whatever it is, you do a survey because you want to know about a group of people in order to do something. And that last part, doing something, making a decision, is really important. Because when you do a survey, you ask all your participants to give you some of their time and their attention and their energy, and you as the researcher have to spend time designing and distributing and analysing the survey, and it's both inefficient and discourteous to do that if you aren't going to do something with the results. So my most important piece of advice for you is, don't do a survey unless you're willing to change something because of the results, including changing your mind. So here are some examples of times when you wouldn't want to do a survey. If you're already committed to a decision, for example, if you've got a contract with a venue for the next 3 years, there's no point asking whether you should change venue. You're not going to. If the decision should be made by the people involved or with specific expertise, when you're deciding what to include in a first aid kit, you don't ask the whole populace, you ask the chirurgeon. If the decision is urgent, surveys take time to distribute, to wait for results, and to analyse. At minimum, for a single question Facebook poll, you're looking at a few days to a week. For a multi-question survey, a fortnight is a very fast turnaround. More like a month is normal. If the decision is a minor issue, if you could deal with it in a group meeting in 5 minutes, you probably don't need to do a survey. And if you have a plan and you're unwilling to change it, that's not a bad thing. But if what you're looking for is confirmation that people will support your decision, a survey isn't the right way to communicate that with your group. Similarly, if you know there's a problem with how things are done and you want to test out a way to fix it, there's limited value in asking for feedback because people are just going to tell you about that problem you already plan to fix. If the topic is contentious and running a survey could increase the dissent in your community, it's probably better to have those conversations face to face, where you can better manage the feelings that are going to happen. For example, if you wanted to explore people's opinions and experiences about racism in the SCA, sending out a survey isn't going to help with getting different people to think about that in a nuanced, community-minded way. Finally, when you're considering doing a survey, make sure you think about the difference between an investigative survey and a vote. You can use the same tools for them, so they can look quite similar, but they aren't the same thing. A vote presents a fixed set of options. It's distributed and promoted through official channels, and it's directly linked to an outcome. You should be able to say when promoting a vote exactly what response will lead to what decision. For example, whichever day has the most votes will be the new regular day for fighter practice, or we will go with the payment structure that receives more than 50% of votes. An investigative survey, on the other hand, informs decisions, it doesn't dictate them. You can ask open-ended questions and often should. The information from your survey may help you come up with new options you hadn't thought of before. It helps you look for areas of consensus and agreement, but it also helps you understand more about people who are in the minority and what their concerns are so that you can address those. You and everyone filling out your survey should know before they start whether they are voting or providing information. So let's say you've identified something you want to investigate. You've checked that a survey is the right tool for your investigation, and now you're ready to start designing that survey. Here's what you should keep in mind as you write your questions. Surveys should be sufficient, efficient, specific, unambiguous, and unbiased. What do I mean by all those things? Let's go through them one by one. And we'll use the example of a survey trying to find out what A&S classes people want to attend. A survey should be sufficient to answer your core question. That means you should collect enough information to answer that question and enough information to contextualize people's answers. If you're asking about potential A&S classes, an insufficient survey could offer people, would you like to attend classes on woodwork, costuming, or dance? A sufficient survey would give a longer list of possibilities and include the option for people to add their own suggestions. A classic frustration with surveys is when you're forced to answer a question, but you don't agree with any of the options. You might also ask, what days would you attend A&S classes? If there's a cluster of people who want to learn how to make a chest, but none of them are available on Sundays, then running a chest making class on Sundays wouldn't work. So this sort of contextualizing question is a good follow-up to help you make plans. It's often helpful to ask why after a multiple choice question to make sure that you're interpreting people's answers appropriately. Sometimes you want to ask for demographic information. Questions like gender, age, local group, length of time in the SCA. This can help you understand different clusters of people among the survey respondents and look for trends. But a survey should also be efficient to answer and analyze. That means you should not ask for more information than is useful, and you should ask for that information in a useful format. I'm going to talk more about question formats later, but here's a simple example. If you asked, what classes would you like to attend, with a multiple choice question, people's answers will be easily comparable, and your survey tool will automatically compile the numbers. If people are asked to write whatever they want in a box, you will have to compile those answers manually. They won't all be comparable, and the respondents will have to do more mental work to think of responsibilities. When you're asking people to choose from a list of possibilities, you probably don't want more than a dozen as an absolute maximum. It makes sense to split up costuming and embroidery in our example, but it doesn't make sense to have 16th century German headwear, 16th century English headwear, and 16th century Italian headwear. Privacy is also an important factor to keep in mind here. If people's answers are anonymous, you don't need to worry about protecting their privacy when you share data or results, which is good. You almost never need people's names, and you only need their contact information if you're planning to actually contact them. Try not to ask for personal information that might identify them unless it's specifically relevant. With every question you add to your survey, ask yourself, how will I use this information? If you don't know what you'll use it for, you probably don't need to ask. We've said that a survey should be big enough and not too big. It should also be specific to your core question. That means you should ask questions that will give you information you need to make decisions, rather than questions which are too broad or which are tangentially related. For example, when planning classes, you might consider asking about the length of time in the SCA. But how is that going to impact your decision making? Why did that question come to mind? Are you trying to plan classes that are aimed specifically at newcomers or at long-standing members? If not, a more useful question in the same sort of vein might be, how much experience do you have with this type of A&S? Or maybe you could just skip this question altogether. It's also important to recognise the difference between questions like, what ANS activities are you interested in? And what ANS topics would you attend a class on? Not everyone who is interested in a topic will want to attend a class on it. The second question is what you need to know to make decisions, so that's the one you should ask. Another example of this kind of distinction is which do you prefer compared to select all you would participate in. Sometimes you want to know which option is most preferred, but sometimes you're trying to work out which option is acceptable to the largest number of people. So as you're writing each question, think about what the question is for and whether you can ask for that information in a more direct way. Your survey questions should also be unambiguous. That means they should be phrased so that respondents understand what you mean and you understand what they mean by their answers. So one example of an ambiguous question is one with no terms of reference. If I ask you to rank 3 types of chart, but don't tell you how to make that decision, you could choose the chart that is easiest to read, the chart that contains the most information, the chart that is useful for a particular kind of data. You could even choose the chart that is easiest to make out of baked goods. Without terms of reference, you can't tell what I want and I can't tell what you mean. Another kind of ambiguity is where there is unclear language. So let's say I ask you to rank polyester on a scale from flammable to inflammable. There are 2 big problems with that because those words are synonyms that seem like they mean the opposite thing. Some of you may not realise that inflammable is a synonym for flammable, and I will have no way of knowing who those people are. And those of you who do realise will have to decide whether I made a mistake or whether I was using some alternative meaning of the words. So everyone involved will be deciphering the question in a different way. It will take them more work. They'll all make different decisions, and I will have no way of judging what you actually mean by your answers. Another particularly frustrating way to create an ambiguous question is to give people a set of options that they might disagree with or that are incomplete, and no way for them to say so. If I asked you which peerage is the best, and didn't have a all peerages are equal, or even worse, if I left one of them out, I would probably get inaccurate results and some very grumpy respondents. So the takeaways here are: use plain language that is easy to understand. Explain your question fully. Provide a none of the above or other option if you can. And if you want to make particularly sure that you understand what people are thinking when they answer a question, give them a box to explain themselves in. So that your respondents' answers reflect their actual positions on the issue, your survey needs to be unbiased, neutral. That means that it should not state or encourage any particular position on an issue, and it should not be structured so that the answers are likely to be biased in any particular direction. So a very obviously biased survey question is, many members of our group did not attend fighter practice on Tuesdays. Why do you dislike Tuesday activities? Obviously, that's not great. It's not going to get accurate, meaningful answers. A more neutral way to approach it would be to ask a series of questions. Do you attend fighter practice on Tuesdays? Is there a day you prefer to attend? If you do not attend, why not? When you're providing information to contextualize your question, try to present it in an objective, fact-focused way. It's particularly important to remember to do this when you have strong feelings about the issue, but you're acting as a researcher, not as an advocate. Those are 2 separate stages. If you're stating an opinion of people in the community, make that clear. Some people have said that, etc., etc. An easy way to accidentally make a biased survey is to give people options to choose from that don't represent them, so that they have to choose an untrue option or just not answer and not be heard. An other or none of the above option is a good solution to this, or giving people a box to explain their responses. There's also an issue with survey structure. The questions that come first will always contextualize the questions that come afterwards. So if you are investigating the question of A&S class topics, and you start by asking whether people would attend a class held at someone's home for access to specialized equipment, they're going to evaluate the topics you ask about next based on whether or not they think it would be held at the central venue or at a private venue. So try to start with the more general questions about interests, general preferences, broad principles, and then gradually narrow down on more specific or practical questions. With all those things in mind, you can come up with a list of questions and an approximate order of what to ask. You'll start with demographics probably, and then do the most general questions, and then the more specific follow-up questions, and end with any other bits and pieces that don't cluster well. How do you turn that into a functional survey? First, you need a survey tool. I use Google Forms. It's free, it's got a fairly clean look, it's easy to work with, and you don't need to sign up to anything if you've already got a Google account. There are other options out there. If something else suits you better, go right ahead. Once you have that, you can start inputting your questions. At this stage, you can add extra descriptive information or instructions under the question itself. And you also need to choose your question types. I'll come back to those in a minute. You also get to decide whether questions should be compulsory or not. Fewer compulsory questions is generally better. It means people aren't forced to give you inaccurate answers if none of the options you offered are right. If it's a longer survey, you'll probably want to divide it into sections. Try to put these divisions in places that make thematic sense, and make sure you aren't asking people to remember things from section A when they're answering things in section B. You'll often end up with a structure something like demographics, theme 1, theme 2, follow up on theme 2, final comments. Put a description at the beginning of the survey, and we'll get back to that in a second. Finally, check your survey settings. What message will people see when they submit their completed survey? Is there a progress bar as they fill it out? Can they see a summary of everyone's responses once they finish it? I recommend not, by the way. Can they edit their response after submitting? Is their email required for them to fill it out? Once you're happy with the survey, show it to some friends or other officers. Do they find it easy to understand? Are there any issues you didn't consider and should ask about? Do they have any other feedback? Then you can work out how to distribute it. But let's come back to the description and then to question types. Your survey description, the summary that goes up the top under the title before they fill out any questions, is an introduction to your project, and it helps people decide whether and how to participate. You need to include information about who you're trying to recruit, what your survey is for, what impact it will have, the time frame for filling out your survey, who is conducting the survey so that they can decide whether to trust you and with their answers, and where and when results are going to be shared. All this information is important because it helps people know how to answer effectively and what's going to happen to those answers and whether they should trust you and do the project. So moving on to question types. Multiple choice questions. There are two types. Pick one of the following options. Use those when the answers are mutually exclusive, when only one of the possible answers can be true at a time. You can also use it when you want to know which option is most preferred. Offering a none of the above or other option will help to make sure people are able to answer accurately. Pick one or more questions are better when it's an and or sort of issue, when multiple answers can be true simultaneously. Essentially, you're asking which possible answers are acceptable or apply to this person. Again, offering an other option is useful. Make it very clear in the question title or instructions that they can choose multiple options, because it's easy to think that you can only choose one, because that's the type of multiple choice question we're used to encountering on tests. If you have more than about 10 options in a multiple choice question, consider breaking it up. Frankly, if you have more than 5, it's worth considering whether to break it up. People just aren't good at processing that many items. Now, multiple choice questions are binary. For each thing on the list, it's either selected or not selected. A ranking lets you compare which of these options is most preferred and which is the least. So put these following 2, 3, 4, 5 options in order. It's a more nuanced comparison than multiple choice, and it's most useful when the options might be exclusive in practice, but you don't expect there to necessarily be consensus. For example, you think there's probably going to be a bunch of people who want to do practice on Tuesdays, and a bunch who want to do practice on Thursdays, and a bunch who want to do practice on Wednesdays, and you want to get a sense of, out of all of those, which ones are going to be acceptable to the most number of people. Keep in mind that it is very easy for people to rank 2 items. Which is better, this or that? But the more items you add, the harder it gets, and the less their answers are going to be worth. 4 is manageable. 5 is pretty much the upper limit. If you're asking people to rank 8 options, the difference between item 4 and item 6, that's not actually going to be very reliable. So a ranking compares options to each other. A rating scale evaluates options based on the respondent's reaction to them. A ranking question could easily get you the result. 8 out of 10 people would choose to find a Lego inside their shoe. If the other options on the list were finding a spider, a squashed grape, and a hairball. A rating scale would show you that no one would be happy to find any of those things inside their shoe. You can use rating scales to check a range of possibilities and find out how many people will be pleased or displeased or okay with each one. If half your respondents prefer option 1, half your respondents prefer option 2, but almost everyone says that 1 and 2 are both good, you know it's not going to be too much of a problem which one of those you choose. They also help you find out how strongly people feel about an issue. So for example, there might be a small number of people who don't want an option, but those people have very strong feelings about it. In that case, you're going to have to be careful how you manage it. The most basic form of these is a 1 to 5 scale, from one extreme to the other, with some sort of neutral option in the middle. Those extremes can be strongly agree to strongly disagree, very bad to very good, never to always, extremely unlikely to extremely likely. There's a whole lot of options, you've seen them before. If you can use a familiar structure for these, people are going to understand it more easily and their answers will be more accurate. So it's a useful question type, but deploy it with care. Finally, short answer questions. These are basically a blank box for people to tell you their answer in their own words. It takes more work to analyse, and we'll talk about that later, but it can also be really valuable. These are most useful in a situation where you want to discover something you haven't already thought of, or the options are too many to list. They're particularly useful for any sort of why question. I usually put one of these at the end of my surveys with the question, do you have any other comments? It's a great way to find out if there's anything that you've missed along the way. All right, so you've designed your survey and you're ready to distribute it to potential participants. There are 2 factors to keep in mind here, getting enough people and getting the right people. Getting enough people to answer a survey is a big challenge. People are, in general, more likely to do nothing than to do something. So to recruit participants, you need to give people a reason to answer your survey. You need to give them lots of opportunities to do so, and you need to make it as easy as possible. The first part, tell people what your survey is for. What are you trying to achieve? How does filling out this survey help their community? Give them something to feel good about being a survey respondent. For the second part, run your survey for a reasonable length of time. A fortnight is very little, really. A month is much better as a minimum. Give people plenty of reminders. Don't just make the link available on your website, send it out through the mailing list multiple times. Over a 1-month survey, you'll probably repeat the announcement at least 4 times. The initial announcement, a week later, you might say, thanks to everyone who filled out our survey. A week after that, or you could say, don't forget to fill out our survey. And a few days before the deadline, last chance. You tend to get diminishing returns from these repeated announcements, but it does make a difference. Finally, as I said, you want to make your survey as easy to fill out as possible. Make it efficient and specific and unambiguous like I talked about above. Tell people how long it will take in your announcement if you can, and provide the link every single time you talk about the survey. It's a good idea to use a short link that people can type out if they need to, rather than the long one that will get automatically generated by your survey tool. There are a lot of link shorteners out there, and you'll find them easily if you Google. I like to use tiny.cc because it lets me write a custom link if I want, and those are easier for people to remember. So that's getting enough people. How do you make sure they're the right ones? You get the right people by distributing your survey through a channel that overlaps with the group that you're talking about. This might be a mailing list or a newsletter or a Facebook group or a combination of those and other options. You can also make it clear in the description of the survey and in the announcements who you want to answer it. You can include things like the group a person belongs to, or the past experiences they might have had, or what information they might have to share. For example, your announcement could say, have you been attending virtual SCA events in the last 3 months? Are you interested in attending virtual SCA events in the future? Fill out our 10-minute survey at link to tell us about your experiences and help us understand what works and what doesn't. Your main announcement should have pretty much all of the important information you included in the survey description. Your reminders can be shorter, but always include the link. Okay, so you've written your survey, you've distributed your survey, you've waited patiently for the survey to close, and now it's time to analyze your results. How do you turn those results into something worth sharing? The first thing you need to know is that data is not information. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take a specific data set and look at the process I mean. A list of answers is not information. It doesn't mean anything. You can't really work with it. A table like this is better. It's more organized. It's clearer. I can decipher it with less work. But it still doesn't mean much. A chart can be even easier to read than a table. You can see how the data is distributed without processing the numbers. But I still don't know what it means. I still don't know what it means in context. This is information. People were most likely to choose either 2 pieces of bread or 0 pieces of bread. However, some chose as many as 5. The average number of pieces was just under 2. To make sure that everyone has the right number of pieces and avoid waste, we should supply a total of 2 pieces of bread per person, but allow people to choose the quantity they prefer. This is an explanation of what the data says that helps me understand what's going on and make a decision about what to do next. To turn a data set into information, you need to organize the data. You need to look for trends. You need to combine it with the context of the question and make a statement about what is going on. Whenever you provide survey results to a general audience, the most important thing you can tell them is what the results mean. It's good practice to also share the data in an organized form, but that's mostly so that people can check whether they agree with your interpretation. The interpretation is what they're going to be working with. Now, one of the hardest questions to answer in survey analysis is, did I get enough data for this to mean anything? And that's because whether you got enough data is based on how much you can trust your survey respondents, your sample, to represent the total population that you're interested in. And you can't check that because the total population didn't answer your survey, by definition. So there are a couple of things to keep in mind here. First, sample size. There isn't a strong academic consensus on how big a sample should be, but I do have a few rules of thumb. If you have a rough idea of the size of your target population, the number of people in a particular Facebook group, the number of event attendees, the number of SCA members in a group, you can compare to that. A 10% response rate, that's good. A 20% response rate, that's really good. A 50% response rate suggests a bargain with the dark forces that govern survey participation. That said, if you're surveying a relatively small group, I find you can't really do anything useful with quantitative data from less than 10 to 15 people. At that point, you're really looking at individuals, not trends. The second thing to think about is sample selection. A representative sample in which the demographics are all in the same proportions that they are in the general population is the gold standard for serious research. We're not working with that. We're working with a sample of whoever was willing to fill out our survey. That means there's going to be a bias towards those who have stronger feelings, towards those who use computers more, towards those who pay attention to whatever channel you distributed the survey through, and towards people who know you personally and want to support your project. Your results aren't guaranteed to be representative of your target group, but they do at least represent experiences that are present in your target group and some of the people who feel strongly on the issue. That's usually enough to work with. The questions you ask about demographics can help you put together a picture of what kind of people are answering your survey. If types of people appear to be missing, for example, you've got very few people over 60 or very few people under 20, then you know you have a gap in your data. It's not something you can fix, but you should keep it in mind as you interpret your results and make it clear when you're communicating those results. So when your survey tool presents you with the results of your survey, they will usually give it to you both as a table of individual responses and as charts that summarize the whole thing. Charts are great. They're great for helping visualize data. People, including you, are generally much better at identifying patterns and trends visually than in a list of numbers. And there are 4 types of chart that are useful for survey data. Pie charts, the first one. They represent distribution of different options as a proportion of the total. They should be used when people could only answer with one of the possible options. They tell you absolutely nothing about how large or small that total is, but they're very helpful for comparing options to each other. For example, you can see in this particular chart, grapes are much more popular than peaches. In general, when you make a pie chart, it's useful to label it with percentages. It isn't always useful to label other kinds of charts with percentages. Column or bar charts. Now, these 2 examples are both column charts, but really the only difference is whether they're oriented vertically or horizontally. A column or bar chart like the first one here, very simple. They compare categories against each other using a numerical scale. They are a better fit if people could choose multiple possible answers, and also a good option when the answers fit into some kind of sequence, like how much people agree or disagree, or times that they would like to attend an activity. A grouped bar chart is useful to combine 2 sets of data. So this is great when people have ranked a set of things. You can show the distributions of rankings for each one next to each other. In this particular chart, we've got employment on the vertical axis, and the blue and orange represents the differences between men and women. And our final kind of chart is stacked bar charts. These are like a combination of a bar chart and a pie chart, because they allow you to compare multiple categories against each other on a numerical scale, and also to compare proportions within a category. So just like in a pie chart, the stuff that is stacked within each of the bars or columns needs to be mutually exclusive. The bars or columns don't have to be. So in this one, people possibly could have chosen more than one colour, but they can't be from more than one country. They're either from Canada or from the US. Whatever kind of chart you make, it needs to have a title that describes what the chart is about. It needs to have labels for each category represented and a measure of the numbers involved, whether those are absolute numbers along an axis or percentages. It's good practice to also include the data in a table form for people who may not be able to read the chart or for those who want to work with the data itself. And speaking of the data itself, spreadsheets are your friend. The automatically generated summary that a survey tool gives you can be incredibly useful. But if you want to present things in a different way, you want to look at data in a table, you want to compare answers to different questions, you need a spreadsheet. Google Forms has a fantastic button where it just will automatically export the survey results to a spreadsheet. It's my favorite thing. Other survey tools, I'm not familiar with how they go about it, but it is really fantastic. Some of you justifiably may hate spreadsheets. That's okay, but they are really useful. You can use spreadsheets to create charts and to customize them. You can change the labels, you can change the colors, you can change the type of chart. You can label them with percentages or with numbers or whatever you want to do, and you can create additional charts that combine information from multiple questions. You can use filters to group your data and to look at only a section of your data. This is particularly useful for comparisons. Within those who said yes to one question, what did the answers to another question look like? You can compare multiple questions using spreadsheets, which can be really, really useful, particularly with comparing the demographic information to responses to other questions or comparing a follow-up question to a previous one. That's really fantastic. And you can set up formulas to do cool stuff for you. My absolute favorite formula for working with survey data is Count A, which tells you how many cells in an area have something in them. You can also use Count If, which tells you how many cells in an area have a specific thing in them, or even greater than or less than a particular number. With those two, average and sum, that's the majority of what I do with playing around with survey results in terms of formulas. If you're not sure how to use formulas, Google can help you. Finally, one more fun trick. If you want to copy a formula across a group of cells, you can just select the corner and drag it across, and not only will it copy, it will adjust the parameters to match its new location. Now, there are many, many more ways to use spreadsheet tools to help you with analyzing quantitative data, and Google can tell you about those. I have a couple more things to talk about, and then we'll move on to sharing your results. When is a number not a number? Some numbers are numbers. How many years someone has been alive, how many kilometers they have traveled, how many dollars something costs. Those are numbers. Those describe things you can count, and the difference between answers can be objectively measured. The difference between 1 and 2 is the same as the difference between 2 and 3, and you can verify that. Some numbers are actually labels pretending to be numbers. For example, rating things on a scale of 1 to 5 from very bad to very good. Is the difference between very bad and bad equal to the distance between bad and neutral? It depends on the person who answered. If I had one answer that was very bad and one answer that was very good, would it actually depict the results accurately to say that the average answer was neutral? No. You can use averages with this sort of data, but it's often more useful to talk about how answers are distributed. So make sure you're aware of which numbers are actually numbers and which numbers aren't. Also in the realm of things that aren't numbers are short answer questions. This is our qualitative data, and it needs an extra layer of analysis. Qualitative data is extremely valuable for understanding how people think, why they answer the way they do, and what they feel about an issue, but it is definitely more work. Your first step is always to copy the raw data to another place to work on, so you don't accidentally mess with the original stuff. Read through the answers to get a feel and see if any themes jump out at you. You then want to start categorizing people's answers by theme, a process that qualitative researchers call coding. The way I generally do this is to make a column for each theme in my spreadsheet and copy the relevant bit of people's answers across into that column. With a small data set, you could make a list in a Word document, but I'm currently working on a survey with 264 responses, and this is what works for me. Once you've gone through your categories once, read them over to see if there are sub-themes, or themes that could be merged, or answers that have been miscategorized. There often are. At this point, you can treat the data like answers to a multiple choice question and do the same kind of analysis you would do on one of those. However, when you get to the stage of sharing your results, make sure you include some or even all of the answers that fit into each category so that people's words are represented authentically. It's also valuable to share your impressions of the results, even if you can't point to exactly what led you to those impressions. Things like people felt strongly about having access to quiet spaces are important observations. Finally, publication. We're almost there. Sharing the results of your survey is absolutely essential. People have given their time so that you have information. Your duty in return is to make sure that their voices are heard. In fact, one of the most valuable benefits of using surveys for decision making is that they communicate to your group that your decisions are based on what they have to say. Which is why it's so critical that, like I mentioned at the beginning, you should only run a survey if you're willing to change your mind. Asking people what they think and ignoring their answers is much worse than just not asking in the first place. When sharing your results, your job is not just to make the data available, but to communicate what the results mean. It can be useful to work through multiple levels of summarizing the data as you prepare. The data in an organized form, a question-by-question description of the results, a description of the results by theme across the whole survey. This will help you draw out things that are worth talking about and figure out how best to summarize it. Think about who you're trying to communicate with and try to match your language to that audience. It's always tempting to talk about this kind of stuff in academic terms, but often plain English is better. When sharing your results, however you express it, you need to cover the following things. Who answered the survey? This includes the number of people, their demographic distribution, and how that compares to the target population. How did you ask them your questions? This includes both the type and structure of the questions, but also the tools you use to distribute and run the survey. What are the most important results? These are the results that directly answer your core question, that validate important assumptions, or that tell you something that you previously didn't know. How certain are the results? Think about who didn't answer your survey, whether a bigger survey is needed. Are there follow-up questions that need asking? Are there potential bias issues that you couldn't control? Why should people care? Talk about what the results mean for decisions in the future or for our understanding of a group. I've included links here to a couple of very different summaries of survey results that I've written. One for a smaller scale project that had multiple stages of polling, which is why some of that contextual information is missing. And the other one is for a large, complex survey that was done in one go. Depending on your audience, your question, and your results, the way you explain your survey outcomes will vary. Whatever method you use, make sure it is A, published in a stable online location that you can give people a link to, and B, announced in all the places that you announced the survey itself. There's a great deal I couldn't cover in this class, and I'm sure as you take on your own projects, you will learn much more. For now, I wish you all good luck and abundant responses to your surveys.